Hello and welcome to VVork. I'm Brian Watrous. This is the 16th in a 10-part video series in which we're learning how to automate using vRealize Orchestrator. If you haven't already seen video number 15, go back to video 15. Video 15 provides an overview into the subject matter of branching. So this is video 16. In video 16, we're going to be talking about a branching schema element provided by vRealize Orchestrator called a basic decision. Now, in order to explain how to use the basic decision, I've already created an example workflow that illustrates how to use one. To get a hold of that workflow and other workflows that I've provided, you need to download a package from, well, you can get the URL from the description in the bottom, down below in the YouTube description. But while you're at it, if you haven't already seen it, you might want to go over to video number 14 where I introduce this package and talk about how to install it. But if you already know what the package is, all you have to do is get the URL down below, download it, and install it into your Orchestrator server. Okay, so with that aside, let's go into our lab environment and see how to use the basic decision. Okay, here we are in the lab environment, and as you can see, I'm in the vRO client looking at a workflow called Are You Happy? That workflow is part of the VVork examples package of workflows. If you don't know about that package, go back and look at video number 14. Anyways, here is our workflow called Are You Happy? And let's just take a quick look at it. So it's got some general information. Looks like this workflow has no attributes, but it does have an input parameter called Are You Happy? Which happens in this case to be a Boolean variable. No output parameters, but there is a schema. And this schema, as you can see, is branching off in two different directions because I've added into this workflow a basic decision schema element. So let's edit this workflow and take a look at how this basic decision works. At a high level, we can just see what this element's going to do. It's going to ask, is that user happy? Whoever's calling the workflow, are they happy? If they say yes, it's going to go to this schema element. If they say that they're not happy, it's going to go to that schema element. So let's poke our head into these schema elements, these scriptable tasks. They're really straightforward. In fact, I'm just going to show you one of them. You can guess what the code is in the other. In the happy scriptable task, it says to the user, it logs, I should say, the message, you are happy. The other schema element scriptable task is going to log you are unhappy. So those are really straightforward. The thing that we want to look at in detail here is this basic decision. So the basic decision, first thing I do when I set up a basic decision is I give it a good label or good name. Whether you call this a label or a name, same thing. By default, if I recall correctly, the label is just decision, which is not very descriptive. So change that name. I'll show you how in a moment. But let's dig into this basic decision and see what's going on. In a basic decision, just like any other schema element, there's an info tab where you can specify information in general about this particular schema element. So notice that the name field that you see here controls what the label is on this basic decision schema element. You can set the label either by changing the name here, or if you double click on the icon, not the label, but double clicking on the icon will allow you to change the labeled icon without having to go into edit mode. But it's pretty straightforward here. We can see which schema element we're going to go to with the success path as opposed to the failure path. And there's a place here to type a description. I'm typically a stickler for typing descriptions everywhere I'm asked to in vRealize Orchestrator. At least that's what I told you when we first started doing these videos. In reality, there are times I definitely always type descriptions. The description, on the other hand, for an individual schema element, whether it's a basic decision like we see here or a scriptable task or whatever, I tend to skimp on typing descriptions for schema elements unless there's something not obvious going on or something kludgy going on in this scriptable task or basic decision. Unless there's something confusing going on in my schema element, I tend to not type descriptions for schema elements. Won't hurt if I do, but that's one place where I do skimp. Pretty much everywhere else I do type descriptions. So that's the info tab, kind of boring. Let's go to the decision tab because this is where all the actions taking place in a basic decision. In the decision tab, you define the test that the basic decision performs. And we know if the test returns true, we're going to go this green path. If it returns false, we're going to go this red path. So why? And how does this work? Well, when you set up the decision, you pick a variable. With the basic decision, you pick one variable and only one variable. In this case here, I picked the one and only variable I have called "Are you happy?", which happens to be a Boolean type variable. The variable used in the test does not have to be a Boolean. It could be a string, it could be a number, it could be perhaps be other things too, but we're going to use Boolean as our example to start with. So the person who defines the test here in the decision tab, first of all, picks the variable that they want the test to be based on. And Orchestrator will determine what type of variable that is, and based on what type of variable it is, this drop-down list here will have different choices. If you picked a Boolean variable, your two choices will be is true versus is false. On the other hand, if the variable you picked was a number, you would get choices in the drop-down list, different choices such as is equal to, is not equal to, is greater than, and so forth. So numerical comparators. And on the other hand, if you picked a variable that's a string, you would get string comparisons such as contains, matches, and so forth. But we're going to keep this simple for right now and choose Boolean. So the way this decision says we're going to work is the decision test is going to look at the variable called "Are you happy?" And if the variable "Are you happy?" is true, then we are going to go down the green path. I know it doesn't say that right here, but I want you to imagine this said, go down the green path. Whether you're working with a Boolean or a number or a string, I want you to always imagine it says, then go down the green path. Because that's what this test condition is saying. If the variable is true, we're going to go down the green path. On the other hand, if it's false, implicitly we'll go down the red path. But notice if we choose is false, which I tend to try to avoid, is true is really straightforward. Everyone understands is true. Is false tends to be a little bit more confusing, so I avoid it if I can. But let's make certain you know how is false works. So if we, instead of saying it is true, we said is false, then the way this test condition is going to work is we're still going to look at the same variable, but in this case, if "Are you happy?" is false, then go down the green path. Even if you think of the green path as the true path, this test condition says if the variable is false, we're going to go the green path. So if that's what you want, that's fine. Go ahead and change it from is true to is false. But normally you probably want to strive to name your variables in a positive sense so that you can say is true. So notice I did not create a variable called "Are you unhappy?" If I did, I'd probably have to flip these around. Instead, I picked a nice positive sounding name for the variable so that I could choose is true and I could easily understand what the green path and red path are going to do. Okay, so now that we've seen, whoa. Didn't want to jip you here. Hang on, there's one more tab, the scripting tab. You'll notice that with the basic decision, the scripting tab is grayed out because unlike a custom decision, which we'll talk about in the next video, with the basic decision, you do not get to explicitly define the JavaScript code that's going to perform the test. Instead, Orchestrator is going to define that code for you. On the other hand, if you use a custom decision, you get to define the JavaScript code explicitly that's used to perform the test. We'll talk about that again in video 17. But this is video 16. We're still talking about the basic decision schema element. We've been talking about it. Let's see it in use. So I'm going to run this workflow. And when I run the workflow, let's say, yes, I'm happy. When I run the workflow, watch the color highlighting, zoom. It went straight across. It followed the blue path to the decision. The decision evaluated to true, so we went the green path. We went to the happy schema element. As you can see, we logged the "you are happy" message. And as we can see from the highlighting here, bam, we ended up here on this endpoint. On the other hand, if I run that workflow again and say I'm not happy, well, you can already guess what's going to happen here. Give the workflow a few moments to run. I know this is highlighted, but that's from the last time. There we go. The highlighting indicates that we went down this path, and we can confirm that by looking at the log message. This time the log message says, "You are unhappy." So nothing all that confusing here in running the workflow, but I wanted to show you to make certain that you know exactly what this workflow is doing. Now, I'm going to show you something here that you're going to want to or need to do at times. At times, whether you're working with a basic decision or a custom decision or decision activity schema element, regardless which of those three you're using, there are going to be times when you need to do some manually intervening with these arrows. Notice here that if you want to, you can select an arrow and you can choose to delete it. But if you do so, obviously if I delete this green path here, I would no longer have a path to my happy schema element. So let's actually see that in action. I'm going to right click, choose delete, and you'll notice I don't have that green path anymore, which is, if I were to validate my workflow right now, the workflow will not validate because this is not a valid workflow anymore. If you need to recreate that green path, notice that if you hover on the decision element, there is I know this is blue, but pretend it's green. Join me in submitting a feature request to get them to change this to green. Think of this as a green arrow. If you click and drag on the green arrow, it'll create a green arrow and drag it to wherever you want, and boom, you've recreated the green arrow. You can do the same thing with the red arrow. It's a little more intuitive. If you delete the red arrow, when you hover on the schema element, you get a red arrow to create the red arrow. So if you ever need to delete the arrows, the red or the green arrow coming out of a decision element, you now know how to recreate it. Let me show you related and potentially more touchy thing that you'll sometimes do. Notice that instead of deleting the red and green arrows, I can choose to delete this basic element itself. I can do the same thing with custom decision or decision activity, but let's do it here in this video with this basic decision. I'm going to delete it. So let's choose delete, and notice that a window pops up that asks you, all right, we're going to delete this schema element that you just said to delete, but if you want to, you can decide which paths, not just the arrow, but the entire paths you want to keep. So I always have to stop and read this window real closely here. So let's see, it says, select the decision activity branch to be deleted, not kept, not preserved, not maintained, but deleted. So if I choose success path, this entire path, it will be deleted. I'll still have this failure path hanging around that I can rehook up to, but choosing success branch means this entire branch, the green branch and everything after it, will be deleted, which if that's what you want, great, choose success branch. On the other hand, if I say failure branch, then this branch will be deleted, this branch will be retained. You can say delete both branches, or what I generally do, because I don't like to think about these first three choices, I just choose none. If I choose none, you'll notice that I get both branches. And if I want to, I can come along later on and decide, no, I don't want this path. And I don't want this branch and delete it. But I usually, when I delete a schema element, I will usually say, don't delete any of the branches, because I like to retain the option to hook back up to these paths later on if I need to. Okay. Not encouraging you to delete paths or delete the schema elements, but every now and then you're going to need to, so I've taught you how to deal with those. Let me revert back to our previous state here to remind you what this workflow looks like. And what I'm going to do in the last part of this video, you don't have to watch this. If you want to jump ahead to video number 17, where I'll talk about custom decisions. Custom decisions are my favorite. If you want to jump ahead, you can do that, but if you would like to stick around for the rest of this video, what I'm going to be doing is showing you the mechanics of how to create a workflow that uses a basic decision. So there's a few little caveats in that discussion. So if you want to hang around, great. If not, pop over to module 17. All right, let me exit out of this workflow. And I'm going to, actually, let me edit the workflow again. I'm going to rename the workflow so I can create this workflow from scratch. Okay, so I've renamed the workflow, and we're going to recreate it from scratch. And in recreating it, I'll start by saying new workflow, and we'll name the workflow you happy? I'm going to say OK. And in the General tab, we've got a description field. Always type a description. This workflow asks the user whether he or she is happy. OK. But more interesting for our purposes here, I'm going to go over to the General tab and create that Boolean input parameter that we saw earlier. It's going to be a variable called are you happy? It's not going to be a string. Instead, it's going to be a Boolean. Not Boolean, but Boolean. There we go. It's a Boolean variable. And I need to type a description, because that's what the user is going to see when they run this workflow. Now, I don't have to do the following part to recreate the workflow that we're creating. So this part is optional, but I want you to see this just in case. I want you to see two things. One, I'm going to create another input parameter called, I don't know, pick a number. That's going to be a number variable. And since this is an input parameter, let me define the label for this input parameter. Pick a number. There we go. So I've created a variable that's a number variable. And to also illustrate a point here, I'm going to create an attribute called some string. That's going to be a string variable. I'm not going to bother to set the rest of this here. That's enough for me to illustrate what I want to show. Now, ultimately, all I really care about in this example here is the are you happy variable. I've just added a few extras to show you a few points along the way. So we'll go to the schema, and I'm going to drag out a decision. The one labeled decision is the basic decision, as opposed to custom decision or decision activity. This is a basic decision. It's the one with the gray icon. I'm going to drag it out, drop it into my workflow, and you'll notice that in doing so, it automatically creates the green path and the red path. And we already know that I'm going to want to have a scriptable task that asks the user if they're happy. Excuse me, this is not a scriptable task that's going to ask a question. This is a scriptable task that's going to log a message saying that the user is happy. And I'm going to be typing some similar code here, so let me copy that. So we've got one schema element here, and I also need another schema element down here, which I could create by dragging another scriptable task down here, or tell you what, I didn't need to copy and paste what I did a moment ago. I can copy the entire scriptable task. So let me copy that. Paste in the white area. Don't paste on the arrow, but paste in the white area. So there's my copy. Drag it, drop it on the arrow, and then change it as necessary. So this one's not going to say happy, it's going to say unhappy. And I need to change the code to say unhappy. Okay, so we've got our branches defined, but we still need to find the test that this decision performs. So let's click Edit. So on the Info tab, again, if there's going to be anything complicated or confusing in this schema element, I'd type a description here, but this one's going to be straightforward. I'm going to go to the Decision tab, and notice I get to, first of all, pick which variable, which one variable, and only one variable. Basic decisions only work with one variable. Which one variable do I want the test based on? So I simply click on this link, and you'll notice I get three choices here. They can be, the variable I pick can be a Boolean, it can be a number, it can be a string. In fact, it can be other data types too. That's why I created the extra variables here. I want you to see that I can pick different types of variables. And additionally, I created one specifically that was an attribute to prove to you that the variable that the decision is based on can be an input parameter or an attribute, and it can be Boolean, number, string, or other types of variables like those. Just to illustrate the point here, let me pick some string. That's not the variable we want in this example. We want are you happy? But I'm going to pick this one first to show you that if I pick a string variable, I get string comparison choices. But wait, that's not what I want. I wanted a number variable. If I choose number variable, I get numerical type comparisons. But again, I don't want those two variables. In fact, I'm going to go clobber them. Let's get rid of those. I don't want that input parameter called, or that deals with numbers, and I don't want this one here that deals with strings. I just want the one input parameter. So let's go back over to the schema. And in the schema, we're going to edit our basic decision once again. I'm going to click the null link and choose the Boolean variable. And since I chose Boolean, I get only two choices, is true and is false. But again, regardless what type of variable, regardless what these choices are, remember, you need to think of this as saying, then go the green path. So if are you happy is true, then we're going to go the green path to log that they're happy. Alternatively, if that variable are you happy is false, we'll go down this other path. So that's it. That's the mechanics of creating one of these. I could run this workflow again and show you what it looks like when it runs, but boring. Instead, we're going to wrap up this video, which again was on basic decisions. In the next video, video number 17, I'm going to be talking about custom decisions, which of these three types of decisions, basic decision, custom decision, and decision activity, custom decision is my favorite. So see you over in video number 17. If you haven't already subscribed, subscribe. See you over in the next video.